Offered as a pre-order bonus for Tony Hawk's 1 and 2 remake, we had a chance to get our first hands on with an early demo. Not just any demo, the warehouse demo, a level that back in 1999 many of us played obsessively. And so 20 years on, Activision sort of saw fit to mirror that same effect with another warehouse demo. And while it captures some of the magic of the original game, there are some things which are a little bit different. And to discuss exactly how it's held up and where it's branched off from the original is John Linneman.
Hey Tom, this is interesting then. This is basically the second remake of this game, really, but it's very cool. It's very cool. I'm really happy with what we've seen so far, but yeah, there's a lot to discuss here. So
yeah, I suppose my first impression really, I mean, it's just a 5GB download and there's not a heck of a lot to it really, is there? I mean, it's just one level.
Well, just think about that for a second though. I mean, it's several gigabytes large, right? And that makes sense being a modern game, but you know, the original games all fit on a CD.
Yeah.
So it just shows you how the scale of things have changed. And I love it. It's fun. But yeah, this game has been moved to Unreal Engine. I guess kind of like the last generation remake games, but this time around, I do feel that the visual remake has been much more successful.
Yeah, it's been much more worthwhile. I mean, the last one was Unreal Engine 3, and
yes.
I mean, I remember it was a disappointment purely because of the way it handled. It didn't have that authenticity, and I think this one gets a lot closer. There are some nitpicks I think we're going to get into as we go through, but I did actually have a lot of fun with it, you know, just 2-minute bursts of trying to hit high scores, and you know, it just goes straight back to that feeling almost, you know, 20 years ago now.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's get through some of the technical stuff first then. So like you said, this is Unreal Engine 4 now, which is a nice upgrade. That means it supports things like high dynamic range rendering, which looks amazing. The HDR output is fantastic. They've rebuilt everything from scratch, so all new assets all around. It's much more detailed. But I guess we should start more with the basic pixel counts. That's kind of, the normal thing to look at one of these demos. So what have you found, Tom?
Let's get these out of the way because I think it's fairly straightforward. Very standard fare, I've got to be honest. Xbox One as the first version I played, pretty happy with it. Renders at 1600 by 900. It looks like it's dynamic. It kind of fluctuates between and 1536 by 864. I noticed that, you know that bit as you first go down the ramp, you smash through the kind of the doors? That's where basically I saw the lowest drop. But, you know, honestly, there's not a heck of a lot to this level, so I'm thinking if there is a dynamic res system, it's probably going to come in handy, you know, for bigger, sparser levels. That's Xbox One. PS4, inevitably, you know, you get a bump up to 1080p native, possibly dynamic. Then we move to PS4 Pro, which is 1440p typically, and then we move over to Xbox One X, which gets up to 1800p, 3200 by 1800.
Alright, so that's all pretty standard, exactly the kind of thing you would expect to see from these consoles. But honestly, you know, image quality is pretty good all around, I'd say. It has a typical Unreal Engine TAA going on.
Yeah.
Everything's very clean. But what I really like though, and this is, I guess you can appreciate this across all versions, is just, it's almost difficult to put this into words, but this has a sense of place that I've not experienced before in a Tony Hawk game. And maybe it's this combination of HDR and the more complex assets they're using. But skating around the warehouse, I mean, obviously you're confined to the warehouse, as it should be, but you get a peek outdoors, and somehow it just gives me this atmosphere and feeling that you're in a larger place, that you're actually inside of a building, which is fascinating. It just kind of struck me, you know?
I know exactly what you mean. I went back to the original game, picked up the PlayStation 1 version actually, just because it's the one I played all those years ago, and it really does feel confined, doesn't it? It's like, it's all very blocked in, and, you know, I suppose it makes sense given the technical limits of the hardware back then, but it really feels like this version of it is imagined as what would have been intended, you know, a kind of a warehouse, literally a warehouse in the middle of a space in the world somewhere, and it almost feels like you could break out. And I tried to several times, to sort of jump out the window somehow, but you just can't. So it's
thankfully not. That would have kind of ruined the flow of the game, I think.
Yeah, but it does. It does show a few things. Like, firstly, they wanted to really layer it over with a proper sort of update visually, but also keep an authentic layout in terms of the geometry. And I think that speaks to a lot of what developer Vicarious Visions is going for. It gets incredibly close to the original in a lot of respects, and I think the visual side of it is one of the areas where I'm most happy with what they've done.
Which makes sense. I mean, that was, I assume, the whole goal here is to bring it back and showcase the new visuals, and they've done just that. And on top of that, I actually really enjoyed the FMV intro. This was sort of a staple of the original games, skateboard filming. It's a big hobby. There's a lot of that stuff going around, all back in the day, especially that kind of lo-fi, fisheye lens shots that you would get. But seeing both the mix of, old school skaters and the new blood in a single video, really nice high quality HD shots. They did a really nice job setting up that intro, timing the music. It kind of feels like a welcome back to Tony Hawk kind of startup. It's really cool, like, I gotta say. And I'm not one that usually sits through these sort of like introduction videos, but this one kind of got me in the mood, and I appreciate that.
Did it bring a tear to your eye?
Almost. But what did actually bring a tear to my eye was actually, well, okay, not really. So the gameplay, right?
Yeah.
We have to talk a little bit about this because this is interesting. I've played so much Tony Hawk back in the day, especially 1, 2, and 3. Like, I think you know what I'm talking about, but I've built up this like muscle memory, right?
Right, we played against each other. I visited your place.
That's right. That was so fun.
Had a good game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're on the same level with this, definitely.
And the problem, though, and it's not necessarily a problem, but when you've played these games so much and you've focused on getting those 1,000,000-point combos and above so often, you immediately notice when something's off. Even all these years later, it really is this muscle memory, and immediately I could tell that things have changed. Like the amount of time you can hold buttons. Like when you go up a ramp, you do a spin, you land the ramp. When I first started playing, I kept falling. I was like, what's going on here? And it turns out like the timing window for when you have to let go of the circle button on coming down a ramp has changed. And there's a lot of little subtle things like this where it's just the amount of time you have to press a button, or the timing and sort of instigating your actions. All of this stuff has changed subtly, which makes sense because they've rebuilt the game. But if you're really used to those originals, it's going to be off-putting at first. But after a few rounds, you start to get into it and you start to overcome it. But man, it's a weird thing.
I had a suspicion of the same thing, and I just thought, maybe, is it just me? Maybe I've gotten a bit rusty after all these years. Maybe I have. But then I dipped into the original game immediately after, which runs at 20, 30 FPS on PS1, and I was suddenly doing a lot better. And the stats aren't different on the skaters. They're not upgraded or anything, and I imagine not in the this demo. So yeah, I was immediately just wondering what was going wrong.
Another interesting change I noticed there is when you fall, how they do this sort of like video glitch effect on the skater to bring you back into the action instantly.
Yes.
Which is different than bailing in the original games. And, it's a fun little change. I thought that was fascinating.
I actually like that in the end, because going back to the original, it creates a bit of friction between, you bail and then suddenly you've got to wait a couple of seconds, and it can be a little bit frustrating, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's, that's how it used to be, but you're right. Like, basically speeding up that process of falling and then getting back up again on your skateboard, it's almost instant now. It kind of keeps you going back in the action. The other big change that we should talk about, and I've only tested this on PS4 Pro, so you have to talk about the other versions, but the frame rate. So obviously the original game targets 30 frames per second on PlayStation, doesn't quite hit it, but some of the other releases like the Dreamcast, solid 30 FPS, and then last time the Unreal Engine 3 remake was also limited to 30 frames per second, though you could uncap it on the PC, but it didn't ship that way, so it was kind of a weird situation. But this time they're aiming to deliver 60 frames per second across every version of the game, which was something we didn't see until Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 on PS2, And then a little bit later, I guess, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2X on the Xbox. Those were 60 FPS, and that's where the series went from there. But the original games were not. So I was really happy to see that. And at least on the Pro, the frame rate was 100% locked in this warehouse map. What about the other versions?
I guess the best test would always be the sort of base Xbox One, and in that case it's pretty much solid 60 FPS. I haven't had any issues whatsoever, and the same goes for every version, to be honest. But you know, the warehouse level's not exactly a massive stress test, so I'm trying to think what other level in the main package would really push it theoretically. It won't be this one, but yeah, needless to say, the demo just runs flawlessly at 60. So,
do we know if they have the downhill jam style levels from Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 in the final 1 and 2 package? I kind of feel like they might be in there, but those were lengthy linear style maps, and they didn't really continue with that in the series. It was just in the first game, like in the mall or in that weird sort of like Dusty Valley area where you're just going from the top to the bottom, executing tricks until you reach the finish line.
Yeah, they did that mainly in the first game, wasn't it? And then
it was just the first game. Although they did a dedicated, if you remember, they actually did a dedicated downhill jam game at some point, but it was very, very different. So that seems like if that's in here, that could be one of the more demanding sort of maps. But we'll see. Yeah, but either way, it seems like they've done an awesome job. Yeah,
and they did a few other neat touches. We've got to mention it. You know, they went into, you know, the soundtrack. They seem to have brought a majority of the original playlist back and added a few more on top.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is kind of the heart and soul of the experience in many respects. And also, you know, speaking on the controls, if you go to the options, you get 3 options. There's like default and Tony Hawk's 1 and 2. Supposing you want to kind of revert back to a time where you didn't have a revert to manual, or you couldn't do wall
the revert was from Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3.
Yes.
And then the manual was for 2. So I guess it's an interesting idea then. I actually didn't fiddle with that in the demo yet, but I like this idea.
Overall impressions, you happy with it? You excited for the final game?
Oh, absolutely. I've been waiting for this quite a bit, and when the full game comes out, I'm hoping to kind of go back and look through the first 2 games across all the different platforms as well, and maybe sort of chart the evolution up to this point. But it's clear that the developers in this one are huge fans of the original, or at least they've paid very close attention to it. So despite the mild changes here and there, it's very faithful, and I'm very eager to see how the full thing shakes out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always been hard to, you know, explain to people who weren't invested in the original 2 games why they were so special, and to kind of put maybe the PlayStation 1 version on a plate to them at 30 FPS and say, so this is what we had. Doesn't quite do it sometimes, and you'd have to go back to 2X, I guess, to give them a 60 FPS version. So it's great to have a really nicely presented packaged version of it that you know, you can really show off. But we'll have to come back to it when it releases in September, I believe. But I think that'll do for today. Thanks so much for joining me, John.
Sure thing, Tom.
If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell to get notifications as any video lands. And of course, if you want a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. And to get in touch with me, John, or the rest of the team, just use Twitter as usual. But from the both of us, thanks for watching.